Um, yeah, I forgot about that. Okay. There are various kinds of relationships which Kabbalah speaks about. The most important relationship being, which is mentioned in most Kabbalistic works, and particularly in the works of the Arizal, the concept of Yichud. Yichud, Y-I-C-H-U-D, I guess you would spell it. In Hebrew, Yud Chet Vav Dalet, Yichud. And Yichudim are translated as unifications, but we have to understand what that means. So let's take it by way of example, by way of relationships between one person and another. And the way it's usually depicted in Kabbalah is actually between male and female. Not that it's necessarily so, but that just works out in the Sfirot, because the Sfirah of Chokhmah is called Abba, father, and the Sfirah of Bina is called Ima, mother. Similarly, the Sfirah of the Sfirot, the six Sfirot, the cluster of Sfirot called Zer Anpin. Zer Anpin is the Sfirot from Chesed through Yesod. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. And that's called Ben, the son. And Malchut is called the daughter. Now, there's a very important introduction to this idea. And that is that the Kabbalah, up until the time of the Arizal, even though they spoke about Yichudim, did not really give the full context of what a Yichud is. Prior to the Arizal, the entire Kabbalah was really focused on the concept of the chaining down of the worlds. Or if you want to call it, if you want to put it in this sense, the sort of the existential blockchain. The blockchain, I did not mean to unmute anybody. I'm sorry, but whatever. Okay, someone asked me that question. No. Okay, so the sort of existential blockchain, what does that mean? It means that there is a chain of being, the chain of existence, which starts off all the way at the top, Keter of Adam Kadmon, essentially, all the way through down to the bottom of the lowest Sfirah, the Malchut of Asiyah. And each level is linked into the next one, sort of in a blockchain, right? So the bottom of the previous one has a special code in order to connect to the top of the next one, which is what blockchain is all about, if any of you know about blockchain. Okay, so prior to the Arizal, that was the main focus of Kabbalistic inquiry and study, was understanding all of the connections all the way from the top down to the bottom. And this was a study that obviously, I mean, we're talking about the enormity of all the spiritual worlds until we come to this physical world, and each of the spiritual worlds is in itself a whole universe, essentially. So researching this and understanding it and explaining it and explaining the ramifications thereof took a very long time, and therefore up until the time of the Arizal, this was the primary focus. From the time of the Arizal spoke not so much about Hishtalshalut, the chaining down of being, but rather he spoke about Hitlavshut. Hitlavshut meaning the interaction of what are called in Kabbalah partzufim. What is a partzuf? A partzuf is an entire relationship. Let's put it that way. There are other ways of explaining it. Partzuf literally means visage or face. I think we explained this last time, actually, in the last class. In any event, this idea of a partzuf is a sphera or a cluster of sphirot that plays a certain role. When I say plays, I don't mean that it's pretend. It has a certain role. Let's put it that way. So the Arizal talks about the hitlavshut of one partzuf in another. Not the external connection, but the internal interaction between the partzufim. the internal reaction between the Sfirot as they are in their clusters and their various roles. So, for example, the hitlavshut of, or as it would be called, the yichud, the unification of Chochmah and Bina, which is the partzuf of Abba and Ima, that produces certain offspring, so to speak. That offspring would be the partzuf of Ben, Zeranpin, the small visage, and Bat, Malchut. Now, without getting too much into the technical side of it, we have in Yichud 4 states, one of which is in a sense the opposite of Yichud. Now, let me explain what I mean. What's the opposite of Yichud? When one person, for example, is angry with another, so they don't communicate, they don't talk to each other, right? They don't talk to each other. Not only do they not talk to each other, but they face each other back to back. That's the wrong way of saying it. They don't face each other. They are back to back. They turn their backs on each other. The concept of achor ba'achor, back against back, is when there's no communication between two entities, between two partzufim. There's no communication, which is obviously the least desirable situation. That's the least desirable situation. In fact, right at the beginning of creation, Adam and Eve were created in that way. They were created as back to back. And in order to bring about the possibility of them turning face to face, so they had to be, so to speak, sawn apart. That sawing apart is called the Nesira, the separating of Adam and Eve, which in the Torah is called, when God takes the Adam's rib, the tzelah. Now, the tzelah doesn't really mean, it means a rib as well. In the simple sense, it means a rib. But it just means they were connected in an external way. They were connected back to back. They weren't connected face to face. So, in order to be able to be connected face to face, they have to be sawn apart. Of course, the danger of sawing them apart is now that they're not connected at all. They're not even connected back to back. They're not connected, and each one of them has to be turned around. Okay, so the least desirable situation is back to back. Then, when one of the parties turns around, so you have panim el achor, face to back. You also have, if the other party turns around instead, back to face. In other words, it could be face to back or back to face, depending on which party you're focusing on. If we're talking about, which is what the essential discussion is about, the relationship between God and mankind, the relationship between God and the Jewish people, essentially in the Torah. So when there is no proper communication, they're called back to back. When God calls out to man, that's called panim la'achor, face to back. In other words, God is calling out to our to our backs, so to speak, asking us to turn around. The concept of turning around is sometimes called in Hebrew called tshuva. Tshuva means turning around, right? Turning or returning, if you like, returning to the primal relationship, which is supposed to be face to face. Now, when that doesn't happen and God calls out to man and man does not answer, then God, so to speak, turns his back as well. And then it's up to man to seek out God's countenance. Et panecha Hashem avakesh, your face I seek, your presence I seek, King David says in Psalms, I think 27. Et panecha Hashem avakesh, I seek your face, your countenance. Now we'll get to this further in a second, but the ultimate level is face-to-face communication. When it's panim el panim. Now, when we say face-to-face, we don't just mean face to face, you're just facing each other. But what it really means, the word panim in Hebrew also means the inwardness of a person, not just his face, because the inwardness of a person is revealed in a person's face. The inner dimension of a person is revealed in their face. That's why the face is so important. And we can see this quite simply in body language and facial expression. Body language is one thing, but facial expression is even more. People who study facial expressions are able to discern what is going on in secret in your mind when you're not even aware that you're broadcasting your thoughts or your emotions. They sort of broadcast in the face. Someone who's trained to see that and understand that can tell a lot about what is going on with a person. So they often have these experts at criminal trials and things like that to see when buttons are pushed and when the person's certain micro expressions come out. So that's just by the way. But the main relationship between man and God is panim b'panim, face to face. But it doesn't only mean face to face, but it means inward to inward, inwardness to inwardness, or essence to essence, if you like. Now, this is spoken about in this week's Torah reading. This week's Torah reading is from the parsha of the section called Ve'et Hanan. And this verse is in chapter 5 of Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 5, verse 4, where it is recounting the giving of the Torah when God gave us the Torah. And Moses recounts this and he says, Panim bepanim diber Hashem imachem. Face to face, God spoke to you. Face to face, God spoke to you. That is the ultimate relationship of prophecy, when it is, so to speak, heart to heart. Now, in this, there are actually two levels. In face to face, there are two levels. I don't want to get into it too much because it's going to take too long. But there's what's called panim bepanim, face to face, and panim el panim, also face to face, but on a much higher level. The relationship of the Israelites to God, when God spoke to them, that was face to face, panim bepanim. Whereas the relationship of Moses to God, of God to Moses, to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moshe, was panim el panim, from the inwardness to the inwardness. Okay, now I'm going to explain what I mean. When we say panim bepanim, in the lower mode, face to face, there's another way of expressing it, and this is the way it's expressed in the Zohar. The Zohar explains this, and it's taken up in a number of different places in the writings, or in Hasidic writings, and so on. It says you can translate the terminology panim bepanim as face within face. Face within face. Now, what does that mean? Face within face means that there's a smaller face within the bigger face. In other words, that the communication is from, so to speak, teacher to student, from higher level to lower level, from the great face to the little face, so to speak, from the divine to the receptive human being. But the receptive human being who is still in a state of, not in a state of full maturity, but still in a state of development. Perhaps somewhat immature, but in a state of development, of spiritual development. So spiritual development, even though one is facing, so to speak, one is facing God, but that spiritual development is only in the process. It's not complete. Where was it complete? It was complete with Moses. with Moshe Rabbeinu, with Moses, because with Moses it says face to face. And the verse continues, K'ish el re'ehu, like one friend to another. In other words, people on an equal level. So when Moses spoke to God and God spoke to Moses, although obviously one can't say that Moses was God or God was Moses. We can't say that, obviously not. God always remains God and Moses always remains a human being. But when is there panim el panim, face to face in the higher sense? When the face below completely merges with the face above. In other words, when the presence below, the person's soul, completely merges into the presence of God. Then it's panim el panim. Then it's real face to face, as one friend to another, so to speak. In other words, in a sense, it becomes a single entity. It becomes a single entity. That is the highest aspect of communication, which ultimately only one person has ever been worthy of, and that was Moses. However, prophets have been worthy of speaking to God face to face, but with a smaller visage, so to speak. In other words, in a sense, as a reflection rather than as an amalgamation, if you want to put it that way, as a reflection rather than amalgamation. Okay, Shane is asking the question, where can a person find out what part of Tanakh they're supposed to read each day? Tanakh is Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, meaning the 5 books of Moses, the works of the prophets, and the writings of the masters of divine inspiration, which is called Ketuvim, the writings. Where can you find out? Well, there's a number of different ways of doing it. Each week of the year, there's a Torah reading which is done on Shabbat in the synagogue. And so the Torah reading for that week would be that particular parsha. So you can find on a Hebrew calendar or a Jewish calendar, you can find what the section is that you're supposed to be reading. This particular week, it's the section called Ve'et Hanan. That parsha, that section called Ve'et Hanan, there's 53 sections altogether in the Torah, one essentially for each week of the year. And if the year is since it's 52 weeks essentially in the solar year, but in the lunar year they're usually less than that. So sometimes the sections are doubled up, the readings are doubled, so sometimes you have a double reading in a few times a year. In any event, that's where you find them. Yes, you can find out from Chabad. You can go to chabad.org and have a look over there what the Torah reading is. And there is another work called Chok Yisrael. Chok Yisrael. It's only here. I don't think it's in English, but over there they give you the section that you're supposed to read that day from the Torah, from the prophets, from the writings, from the rabbinical teachings, from Kabbalah, etc. Something for every day has a whole composite. All right, to get back to the subject. So the idea here is to work towards that relationship of face to face. Now, face to face, like Moses had to work towards that. Are we going to be able to achieve it? Well, even the greatest of the prophets, besides Moses, did not really achieve fully that full integration. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for whatever level it is that we are capable of accomplishing. So in other words, there's that kind of unification, that yichud that goes on a daily basis. No, it's all right. Don't worry about it, Shane. Fine. Questions are allowed. Okay, so where now do we stand? one of the ideas that has a tremendous where this has a tremendous impact is in the idea of how you communicate, how we all communicate with our children. Now, later on in the same Torah reading, in Deuteronomy, what I read from you before, Panim el Panim, was Deuteronomy 5:4. So a little bit further on in Deuteronomy 6:7, there's another verse that says like this, and you shall teach these words to your children, and you shall speak of them when you are sitting in your house, when you're going on the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. It's part of the Shema prayer. Now, the question that we're going to ask is, what does this have to do essentially with education of our children? And the answer is as follows. When we communicate with others, and our children are the prime example of others, unfortunately, in some families, the adults communicate with other adults and they do not communicate with children, and that's a major problem. That is a major problem. But the communication with children is a paradigm of the communication of the relationship that there is between God and man. The relationship between parents and children is a paradigm, a reflection of the relationship that there is between parents and children. In order to be able to put this communication on the level of face-to-face, even if it's not the higher level of face-to-face, but it's the lower level of face-to-face, which is still a very, very high level. So obviously, a lot of energy is required for that. A lot of energy is required. We have to put in a lot of energy into our children in order to be able to achieve that. But how do you do it? How do you speak to the inner heart or soul of your children? A very difficult thing. But there is a clue that we just said, that we just explained. There's an expression of the rabbis that goes like this: words from the heart go to the heart. Words from the heart go to the heart. In other words, when you're teaching your children and the message is coming from your heart, then the message will go into the heart of the person that you're speaking to, your child. Not necessarily your children. It's true in every case. Messages from the heart go into the heart. And therefore, in order to be able to communicate these messages, these ideas to one's children, one has to first get to the heart of the matter in yourself. It's very damaging to a child's self-respect, to his self-image rather. It's very damaging to a child's self-image when the parent's phone or the television or the computer or whatever seems to be more important than the child. I know parents, and it's a very good idea in general. When my children were small, we did not have cell phones, so it wasn't such a big problem. But I do know parents that have made a rule in their house that when the children are awake before they go to sleep, in other words, after they come home from school, and certainly while eating dinner and so on and so forth, And then for some time afterwards, the rule is no television, no radio, no telephone. Why? So that we communicate with our children. They don't talk to us as if they talk to our backs, and we don't talk to them as if we talk to their backs, because children pick up the message very quickly. And that message becomes, I'm not interested in you, and therefore the child will respond with exactly the same message, I'm not interested in you. And then you're in a state of basically back to back, instead of being face to face. So the idea, therefore, is to turn things around, to turn face to face. Talk to each other. One of the things that I used to spend time with my kids every night when they were going to sleep. As they were going to sleep, I mean, we obviously spent dinner together, and the rule was no radio, no television. We don't even have television, but no radio, no television, no phones, no devices of any sort except for emergencies, of course, while we're having dinner. And then for a short time after dinner, while the kids are doing homework, if they haven't done it already or whatever it is, and then when my kids were little, I would read them a story at night, usually an uplifting story, a story about holy people, or about a biblical story, something like that. Usually a Hasidic story about one of the great rabbis, one of the great saints, tzaddikim, and so on and so forth. But any stories that are uplifting. Of course, scary stories and horror stories are not what you want to tell your child when they're going to sleep. And that kind of communication, just to be able to talk to your child face to face, and even if it's not telling them a story, even if it's my kids just like stories, and I like telling them. So even if it's not face to face, and even if it's not a story, but it's some kind of face to face communication. How was your day? What did you do? What was, that kind of thing. Then it's still panim al panim, it's face to face. That face to face communication, if it's coming from the heart, in other words, it's not thinking about something else while I'm talking to you because I have the obligation and the duty to talk to you, but thinking about talking to you because I want to talk to you. So the idea, therefore, would be to communicate, to as Terry's saying over here, I didn't read it thoroughly, but to open the channels of communication between yourself and your child. And that's a paradigm, in fact, for opening the channels of communication between you and God. God's always listening. The problem is we're not talking. And when God is talking, we're not listening. So the idea is to listen and to talk. That's part of what prayer is all about. Prayer is the idea, it's even called, one of the names of prayer is sicha. Speech is talking. You're chatting to God. Now there were Hasidic rabbis. I'm sure there still are. I just don't happen to know any at the moment, who have these like long conversations, so to speak, long conversations with God. In other words, they really have conversation. That's what prayer is really about. Prayer is not just supplication. Prayer is conversation. That's why it's called sicha, conversation. One of the terms for prayer is conversation. Just open up your heart and talk, and eventually, if not right away, you'll sense that you're being heard. All right, let me see some questions here. If the nature of God is light and we are able to channel light, how do we open our channel for as much light as possible? Most things are open channel and very open, but not as open. I guess Clipboard cleaned our channel. Yeah, facing a clipboard helps us all, and therefore open up our channel. I'm confused, you'll have to clarify. Okay, let's answer that question first. The difficulty of opening the channel is the difficulty of opening the channel is that we don't want to listen. Or maybe we want to talk, but we don't want to listen usually. One of the things that King David says is, he says, "Speak, God, because I'm listening." And in fact, God tells us, "Shema Yisrael," all right? Listen, oh Israel, listen, people, listen, human beings, listen. Listen, you got to listen. Open your ears, and then the ears lead to the heart, so to speak. You know, and that's so. To answer your question, how do you open the channel? First, make a channel. That's number one. Talk. Set aside a certain time every day in a certain private place every day, and talk to God. In Jewish tradition, this is done at least 3 times a day. 3 times a day in public prayer, and at least once a day in private prayer, or twice a day in private prayer. There's 3 public prayers: morning, afternoon, and evening. Those are the public prayers, where one's with a quorum, with a minyan, with 10 other people at least. And then there's the 2 private prayers, which one is when you go to sleep at night. And then there's the midnight prayer. Both of them, when you go to sleep at night, the midnight prayer is much more of a private prayer, and that's like opening up your heart to God, talking. And believe me, God is listening. You may not feel it right away, but when you get used to the idea, you'll find out that that there is a channel of communication. And the problem is we don't use it, so it becomes atrophied. Okay. So Dennis asks, so we could say that face-to-face would be likened to doing soul searching. I mean, I think soul searching is a preparation more for the discussion, or for talking. But just simply talking to God, that's all. That's what we're talking about. Just, try it. You might be surprised at the results. So what can we as human beings do to help Abba and Ima turn to face each other? The requirements, there's 2 requirements. The one requirement is what is called in Hebrew bitul meaning self-nullification, humility, and the other is joy. Self-nullification, humility, is a quality of Abba, of the Sphira of Chokhmah, and joy is a quality of the Sphira of Bina, of the mother, of Bina. Em habanim smecha, the mother of children, is happy. She's in a state of happiness. So these 2 things are required in order to cause them to face each other. Those are the inner dimensions of those 2 sphirot. And by humility and joy, automatically their communication begins to happen. We get in our own way. Oh yeah, we absolutely do. But it's easy enough to get out of your way, out of your own way. Just needs a little practice. That's all. Rabbi Weinberg, you can't listen unless you're silent. Both have the same letters. That's very nice. Wow, now that is nice. Very nice. Silent and listen have exactly the same letters, 100%. Absolutely, that's fantastic. Great. When you pray, you cry. Why? Is this bad? Not at all. On the contrary, one of the deepest signs, one of the signs of deepest level of prayer is crying. Crying can be cathartic. In other words, you're letting it all out. But crying can also be crying out for communication. Yes, exactly. God loves a broken heart. Exactly. That's the. However, when we say that God loves a broken heart, there are times for that. The rest of the time, one must be in a state of joy. One cannot focus. When one is in a state of crying, unfortunately, we tend to focus on ourselves. That's what we tend to be focusing on when we're crying. However, in a state of joy, it's much easier to focus on the other. In other words, on the Almighty. God loves a broken heart is absolutely the case, but God's love is expressed in joy. In other words, the love of God should arouse joy in a person. And that's why it says, Em habanim smecha, the mother of children rejoices. The mother of children rejoices because there are children. The person is producing. They're doing something. They're producing. They're doing something in the world. Therefore, there's now when we say producing children, we don't only mean it in the literal sense, but those actions which impact the world and impact other people are a cause for joy. Not egotistical joy, but just joy of the fact that you were able to help. You were able to put in some communication. Let's put it that way. So basically, therefore, the whole idea of what it says in this week's Torah reading, face to face, God spoke to us. The main aspect of that is that we, so to speak, turn our face, our inwardness towards godliness. It's not just a surface thing. He's not talking to our back. He's not talking to our don't care attitude, but rather talking to the attitude of we want to communicate and we want to care and we want to be involved. And that's basically the message, folks. Okay. I think I'm going to leave it at this for tonight, unless there's other questions. We're good? All right. Okay, folks. We will talk next week. And again, if anyone has questions, you're welcome to write KabbalahDecoded@gmail.com. KabbalahDecoded@gmail.com. Kabbalah, which is spelled AHKABBALAH, decoded, one word, @gmail.com. And I will try and answer you. I don't always get to the emails right away, I'll be honest with you, but I do try to get to them eventually. If you have the particular topics that you would like discussed, you are welcome to request various things also. And that is that's always a possibility. Don't feel shy. If I don't want to do it, I won't. Okay. All righty, folks, have a good one, and we will be in touch next week.